Well, I started working with George Osborne when he was the political secretary to the leader of the opposition and he was 26 years old. He was the leader of the opposition, himself was only 35 years old, and then George was shadow chancellor at the age of 33. So I thought he'd be a good person to ask about the right age to enter politics, the right age to run for office, and what you do if you leave politics when you're still relatively youthful. So good morning, George.
Good morning, Danny. I never thought I'd be on your radio show, but I'm very excited.
I'm excited to have you. Listen, given that the US has one of the oldest presidential candidates in history, indeed, it's the oldest presidential pairing in the race, I thought that might be quite a good place to start. Joe Biden is 77. Is he too old?
No, I don't think he is, because it's not really about age. It's about whether you have the energy and the ideas, in this case, to be the president. And, I mean, I've met Joe Biden quite a few times, and one of the conversations I had with him was about him becoming a senator when he was 29. He's actually one of the youngest people ever in the history of the United States to enter the Senate. In fact, he wasn't allowed to enter until he was 30. He got elected, but they wouldn't let him in until his birthday. So I think that's an example of a career that both started very young and now obviously is concluding at a ripe old age. So it's not, as I say, in my experience of politics, as indeed other walks of life, it's not really about age. It's what you bring to the job.
So you've met him a few times. You'll have the questionnaire, which we're all trying to feel our way to. Has he slowed up a bit, do you think?
Well, I think, look, he's obviously, I mean, I haven't seen him in the last couple of years. He's not, the youthful, young tearaway in Democrat politics that he was when, 40 years ago, obviously. And he's more now the kind of grand old person of the Democrat Party. He was the safe choice, wasn't he, in that contest? But as a result, I think probably the best placed person they could have picked to try and beat Donald Trump.
But you know
Um,
you know what energy
so
is needed, because
yeah,
I remember meeting with you in your office when 10 Downing Street or 11 Downing Street, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and you were going back to work. I was already done for by that point, so you know that you need energy. And do you think he's really got that energy?
well, look, I think there are different ways to do these jobs, and I'm not that I'm comparing being Chancellor to President of the United States, but they're very, very um, energy consuming. And the energy is not just about the paperwork and the late hours and whatever. It's that kind of constantly thinking, what more could I be doing? And I think the biggest sort of missing ingredient in politics, but again, it's true in other areas, is original thinking. The people you come across who come have sort of new ideas are few and far between. And so therefore it's not really how many hours you put in or what age you are, it's can you bring original thinking. And I've met people in their 70s who are full of new ideas, and I've met people in their 30s who've got no new ideas at all. So I think Biden will be a very good and impressive president of the United States. There's probably no one who's had a sort of longer training for it in that respect. And I think, look, generally for the world, I've always, I'm a conservative. I've always had close links with the Republican Party, and I've got lots of friends in the Republican Party. But I think Britain could do with a reliable, predictable ally in the White House, someone who we know and someone who is not going to surprise us with, tweets at 5 in the morning suggesting we appoint Nigel Farage as our ambassador.
But why does America have two candidates in their 70s? And isn't there, one of the things that you talk about, new ideas, aren't these people going to be recycling the ideas with the best will in the world of 20 or 30 years ago? Um, and how do you think this has happened that they've ended up in that position? Because, I mean, even Bernie Sanders was also an old candidate. They had Michael Bloomberg, whom you know well, also an old
Mm.
candidate. Why has this gone on?
I don't think I think it's probably just coincidence. I think it's true that politics, certainly the kind of coming people, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, were young, and of course the David Cameron team that I was part of was pretty young. But I think that was, it's partly that was because a sort of elder generation had given away, the Reagan Thatcher generation. There was a new sort of broom in politics, and now maybe we the sort of cycles turned a bit, and you get these old. But I'm not. I don't. I think you can probably. It's too much. It's too much sort of hindsight to impose a pattern on this. I think, if there had been Joe Biden, I'm sure would love to be running for president 20 years, being 20 years younger, because he probably would have more energy. But, it turned, and he's had several goes at trying to run for president, but this time it worked for him. And so I don't know. I think we can read too much into it, bluntly. It's not that I think society has
Okay.
come to respect older leaders.
So listen, it's just you and me and the listeners. I think both of us realise William Hague isn't listening, so we can therefore privately behind his back discuss this. Do you think our boss was too young to be leader of the opposition?
Well, he was 36, wasn't he? I think when he became leader of the opposition. But then David Cameron was 39, 40, and a pretty effective leader of the opposition. So again, it's kind of what you bring. I think you could, obviously the risk when you're young is that you can look not only inexperienced but a bit jeune, a bit too kind of brittle, and lacking a kind of the roundness that comes with experience and the passage of time, and possibly that was the case for William when he became opposition leader. But but I suspect that might have been the issue several years later. And to be fair to him, he was, again, he was in a sort of impossible situation. The Tories had been in office for 18 years. They'd just been kicked out. Tony Blair had just arrived. The economy was going well. It was a really tough beat for any opposition leader.
Yeah. Should he have waited, do you think? Or do you think you just have to take it when it's there, when it's on the table? You can't wait.
Well, I don't think you can. I mean, famously, Michael Heseltine is said to have mapped out a career on the back of an envelope. Make money in your 30s or whatever it was. Make money in your 20s, get into Parliament in your 30s, enter the cabinet, and of course the end bit was become prime minister, which he didn't. And so I don't think I think kind of overly thinking your political career and thinking you can kind of pick your timing is a mistake. There was a moment for William to become leader of the Conservative Party, and he went for it. And he became leader of the Conservative Party. And by the way, he's had an incredible career since as the great foreign secretary and many other things he's done in his life. So, I think you can't, you don't know, none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, Danny, right? Literally. And so we can have a good guess at it, but we don't know. And, who would have predicted, look at the world we're living in the summer of 2020. And at the beginning of the year, all the predictions in the Times and other great newspapers like the Evening Standard, none of them had there's going to be this virus which is going to, completely disrupt our lives. So you can't predict the future. And it's one of the most difficult things about studying history. The people in history don't know what's happening next. And so I don't think you can overly structure a political career and think I'm not going to run to be the leader of the party when the moment becomes available, if that's your ambition, because I'm going to wait 10 years or 20 years.
You did sort of think that you were too young to be the leader of the Conservative Party at the time that David Cameron ran. Not too young, but didn't have quite enough experience, and that was certainly part of your thinking. So did you feel the same when you became Chancellor of the Exchequer, or even when you became a little bit earlier than that, when you became Shadow Chancellor? Did you, I know that when people asked you that question, you had a ready answer, but did you feel it in yourself?
I didn't. I mean, when I became Shadow Chancellor, I was Michael Howard's Shadow Chancellor as well as David Cameron's. And, he offered me the job, and he very kindly gave me, which you don't normally get in politics, a couple of days to think about it. And I thought, I'm 33 years old, and I'm also was very conscious that the last 6 Conservative Shadow Chancellors had died on the political battlefield against Gordon Brown. And, I thought my whole political career might be over before it's even started. And so I did think about that quite long and hard. But I actually came to the conclusion that I guess William came to, and we were just discussing, which is I've been offered the chance to be the Shadow Chancellor. And if you're in opposition, that's the second best position going, and I'd regret for the rest of my life if I didn't take it and try to make the most of it and be a success at it. And then I spent 5 years as Shadow Chancellor, one of the longest posts anyone's held that post. So I definitely felt it with Shadow Chancellor. When I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, although I was young when I became it, historically speaking, I actually felt pretty experienced in that I'd been this very long-serving Shadow Chancellor. I had thought a lot about what I wanted to do. I was pretty clear about what those first budgets needed. So I felt like I had been 5 years in preparation for that job. And again, no one can choose really their sort of timing in politics. But I think being in opposition is a great training for being in government. And I felt incredibly fortunate to have had such a long period of time to think about what I wanted to do if and when I got into number 11.
An aspect of the sort of Cameron's team's youth was that their experience had been political, and they were very, very practiced, experienced, and adept at what they were doing in terms of the immediate politics in front of them. But it was a constant criticism, and I wonder whether you felt it. What do these people know about life, right? Not so much socially, but have you done any other jobs? For example, David had a little bit, but you worked for the leader of the opposition, gained that political skill, worked for Douglas Hogg. Didn't have so much. Did you feel sometimes when you were Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're dealing with big business people, that either in terms of dealing with them or just in terms of dealing with the problems in front of you, it would have been useful to have had a longer career before that?
And I mean, the short answer is no, because I don't think I brought an enormous amount of political experience, and and British politics, as indeed is littered with business people, with great, fantastically successful business people who do not succeed in politics. And I think it's a rather romantic idea. It's almost sort of ancient Athenian idea that the kind of good citizens of the country to form the parliament, to be the government. Politics is a very tough business. And someone who's been doing it for 20 years and seen it at every level, as I had, from the most junior kind of photocopy boy at Downing Street up to being the shadow chancellor and the chancellor, I just had a lot of political experience, and I'd seen a lot of crises come and go, again, with different sort of viewpoints. And I knew when, something was serious and when something would blow over. And I thought that gave, others will judge, that, gave me a maturity that was not necessarily reflected in the in the fact I was 38 or 37, 38, 39. As for the sort of external experience, again, it's sort of striking, and you will know many political figures, Danny, like me. Some people with a kind of world of experience are incredibly narrow-minded when they get into politics. Other people who've had their entire career in politics are incredibly broad-minded. And I don't think, I think it's the sort of CV. Look, as we know, if you've ever employed someone or in any kind of role, the CV tells you not actually very much. It's the person and their character and their ideas. And as I come back to that point, the thing that was lacking in every political environment I've seen, including the current one as I observe, is not people of experience. It's a real brave thinking. It's like who's prepared to think outside of the kind of traditional tram lines of politics. And I thought, look, I mean, I'm extremely biased, but I think the Cameron government in 2010, in coalition, came up with a whole series of ideas about education reform, a green energy agenda, constitutional reform, economic reform that will stand this test of time as a kind of one of the best governments. And
you are biased, so we'll.
But I'm super biased, but I don't. I think people look back. They will look back on that 2010 government with some nostalgia. I think. And I haven't noticed much reform going on in the country since. So.
Well, let's just deal with this government now and on the question of age. You've got a very young Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. I think he was a little bit older than you when he became Chancellor. Is that right?
He is a few months older, yes. I had to check.
I knew you would have.
I think he's very, very good, by the way.
I know you well enough to know you would have checked. Right. Well, what I want to know. Has he asked you for advice about dealing with being that high office at that sort of young age?
Well, I'm not going to, even to you, Danny, and our millions of listeners. I'm not going to talk about my private conversations with him, but I know him pretty well. He's very impressive. He, by the way, I think illustrates, I would say in this government, without being too disrespectful to everyone else, where are the kind of interesting ideas coming from? Largely from the Treasury. It's one of the great myths, actually, of the last two prime ministers, both Boris Johnson and Theresa May that they're sort of anti-Treasury. They should go and look at the front door of number 10. It says First Lord of the Treasury, and prime ministers like David Cameron, who know how to use the Treasury and get on with their chancellor, can become, it can enormously enhance their power. And Rishi is using the brilliant civil servants of the Treasury and to come up with some really original ideas. Everything from the restaurant help scheme that we've seen this August to the furlough scheme, really original policy responses to an unprecedented situation at the moment. So, Rishi is impressive. The Treasury is being impressive and doing what it does best.
Okay, so he's got a political dispute on. The Times has been covering, or a certain incipient political dispute. There'll be one anyway over resources in this government. But the example we used was the pension lock, where he favours relaxing that policy, and Boris Johnson is said to favour not doing so. What advice would you give him about trying to settle that sort of row?
Well, I introduced the pension lock, so again, I'm a bit party free on this. And for all the talk about its generosity, let's remember that when I was younger in politics and in opposition, and go back to the 1980s, pensioner poverty was one of the biggest problems in our country. Some of the poorest people in our country were some of the eldest who had least ability to do anything about it because they retired and were no longer working. And the fact that we've all but eliminated pensioner poverty, thanks to the reforms of that government I was part of, is something I'm really proud of. And so I don't necessarily agree that it's unaffordable. I think it's a question of a country and its priorities, and whether you want to look after the elderly citizens in that country.
Isn't that a question?
There are certain decisions I took, where I thought that some of the things that go just blanket to all pensioners, regardless of how old they are, how rich they are, like the BBC TV license. For almost the entire existence of the BBC, pensioners have paid the license fee. It was only Gordon Brown who, as a gimmick, really introduced this thing that said suddenly, the elderly people shouldn't have to pay license fee regardless of how rich they are. And I think the BBC compromise, which I gave them the power to introduce, which is poorer pensioners won't have to pay it, richer pensioners will, is perfectly sensible.
It's also political, though, when we're talking about generational. The Conservative Party's voter base is older voters. So isn't it just trying to make sure that it protects older voters? And the result of it is younger voters are completely turned away from the Conservative Party. And that started, of course, a long time before this government.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's just down to kind of pensioner benefits. I mean, again, I think David Cameron's government was pretty effective at winning support amongst younger voters. And I think there are other reasons why the Conservative Party, and elements of the Conservative Party who want to kind of wage a war on modern culture and, and look, the great B word, Brexit, not supported largely by young people in this country. Those are reasons why younger people have been pushed away from the Conservative Party. But doesn't mean this Conservative government or a Conservative government that comes after it can't win back that support. I mean, it's always probably going to be the case that more youthful people will lean more to the left, but that's but there are degrees of that. So I don't think it's about pension benefits. And I would say, you look at the things like the furlough scheme that Rishi's introduced. That disproportionately benefits younger people in work, or who were in work until this virus hit. So there are things which ultimately, as a government, if you're too factional, you're too sectional, you try and construct a coalition of just parts of the country and not govern for the whole country, you'll be found out. And governments that are more, and I don't mean this in the Tory sense, I mean it in the general sense, more one nation, try and govern for parts of the country, even if they don't get political support from those parts of the country, do better. And one of the biggest mistakes I made with William Hague in opposition, and you'll remember, is that sort of ridiculous war we had on the metropolitan elite, and and you hear echoes of it now in this government. It's trying to divide the country and set and kind of exacerbate feelings of a grievance, when you should actually, as a prime minister and a successful political party always trying to bring the country together and not
Isn't
speak to division and not speak to grievance.
once you've supported Brexit, though, aren't you left with that as a political position, and aren't you left with older voters, and don't you then have to double up on that and support that? Do you think that the Conservative Party has just now moved away from you and has now moved to a position, because it supports Brexit, because it's appealing to older voters, where your pro-metropolitan elite position isn't tenable?
Well, Brexit has been settled in the sense we've left the European Union in the beginning of this year. And if I was the Conservative, again, I'm still a member of the Conservative Party. But, the Conservative Party I care about would not be continuing the kind of culture camp against the metropolitan elite, the people who voted Remain. By the way, 48% of the country. I would be trying to bring the country together and create a Brexit that, whilst not everyone will be pleased with, at least people feel that there's an attempt to bring people together. And look, I think Boris Johnson, who I've known a very, very long time, that actually his natural instinct, and you saw it when he was mayor of London, and you see it now in some of the things he's a natural. He naturally wants to be everyone's prime minister. He's not a factional politician. I know that's how he ended up kind of seizing the Conservative leadership, but that was a means to an end, I suspect. His natural demeanour is to want to be everyone's prime minister, just as he wanted to be everyone's mayor of London.
Well,
and certainly my advice to him, not that he needs it, is to be like that, because he's now got, let's face it, in the December general election, he was facing a completely unelectable disgrace of a Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who did enormous damage to the Labour movement. That is not going to be the case next time. He's got a very credible leader of the opposition he's facing in Keir Starmer, who I note even on today, like weighing in on the BBC Proms row, is doing everything he can to move to the centre, to be everyone's leader of the opposition, to not to sort of surprise people with the issues he takes up. He's got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, and the Labour Party's got an even further way to go. But it's got but the Boris who's going to be the Boris who's the Prime Minister for the whole country, not actions within it, either whether they're geographical or age-based or because they backed Brexit or Remain.
Well, okay, so one problem, just to finish off with, that Joe Biden will not have is, what does he do after he's been in office? David, Cameron left office while he was still relatively young. So did you. Is it difficult to find something as engaging as politics as a second career?
Well, the truth is, politics is a wonderful, incredibly exciting career to be in. Whenever I get asked at schools and universities whether people should go into politics, I strongly recommend it if they want to, whether they're on the left or the right. But it is enormously consuming. Everything is sort of sucked into the black hole of the political career. And of course, you also quite naturally believe the only way to have a voice in public life is to be in the cabinet. But that's not true, and you can't see that when you're either trying to get into the cabinet or sitting around the cabinet table. There are so many other influences on our society and so many other things you can do to contribute to its well-being. And I think, I may bring you into the conversation. You stood for Parliament many years ago, lost because Conservative candidates everywhere were losing in that election. But since, you've found a way of contributing to the public debate that is not the political career that you might have had in the past. And I'm finding the same thing. And I think that kind of the only life lesson I've got, I'm sure this is true, by the way, of people who've achieved other things when they're young, whether they were in the movies or produced a song or ran, were incredibly, a successful athlete or whatever it is. You've got to, if you spend your whole life kind of regretting that you've moved on from that or that wanting to be back to that place, you're not going to have a very happy time of it.
So
whereas
you fancy another crack?
Nothing other than incredibly lucky I had the career I had at the age I had, and now I'm enjoying the rest of my life.
You fancy having another crack, though? You can never imagine going back into frontline politics?
There's always part of me that thinks, that would be interesting, and I care as much as I ever did about the country and its well-being. Uh, but second acts are hard in British politics as they are in American politics. Although Joe Biden may be proving us all wrong.
George Osborne, thank you so much for joining us.